I'm in the bathroom, so this message is probably gonna sound like shit. Yes, that's a Bloodhound Gang reference. What's up, fam of Liberty? It's your boy Big Sarge, and tonight I'm doing a special live stream with Deja Fox, a young progressive candidate running for Congress in Arizona. You absolutely do not want to miss this live stream because Deja might only be 25, but she's already got political experience, having volunteered for Kamala Harris's campaign, and she's already been arrested for some bullshit, bogus, trumped-up charge stemming from allegedly being allegedly disruptive during a protest in D.C. That's right, your girl Deja is not only a political candidate, but she's also an activist who's willing to put herself in harm's way to protect and fight for what she believes. Today I was originally going to talk about how all of us concealed carry Second Amendment loving citizens ought to handle interactions with masked men wearing nondescript civilian clothing, trying to snatch people off the streets, but then I thought, you know what? Let's treat this like a sermon and do what's called a homily instead. So let Reverend Big Sarge proselytize or whatever. Y'all down for a history lesson that isn't about the Civil War? In 1946, U.S. military combat veterans from McMinn County, Tennessee returned home after fighting tyranny overseas, whether it was stacking bodies in the Pacific or killing Nazis and fascists in Europe. During the war, a couple of troops had gone home on leave and wound up killed by local law enforcement. Well, this was a small town, and the county had roughly 10% of its population engaged in fighting World War II, so word got around to the troops overseas when they were writing home. Hey, there's some fuck shit going on here, and you know how small towns are. Tea was spilled. So when these guys came home after hearing how corrupt the local government and local law enforcement were, they weren't in the mood to be fucked with. Troops were getting their mustering out pay, in other words, that final military paycheck, and they were going home. They'd step off buses and the local cops would start arresting people for imagined offenses, and all that government money started getting confiscated. Now, these GIs tried doing things the right way first. They tried to challenge the local authorities by running for office. They created a party of veterans called the GI Nonpartisan League, requiring veteran ID and nonpartisan pledges from the said veterans that hoped to stand for office. Running for sheriff was a combat veteran named Knox Henry, who was widely respected even by his opponents. Another veteran, Ralph Duggan, was a Navy officer who was also a respected lawyer. Remember those names for later. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of a county boss. Remember Boss Hogg from Dukes of Hazzard? Or maybe you might be familiar with the term political machine. So the guy running the machine that ran much of Tennessee's politics was pretty wealthy, and a lot of the people that he installed into office were also wealthy and had avoided wartime service. All these fighting age men were overseas, so they weren't home voting. So when the GIs started running their own candidates, I think you can imagine that corrupt politicians made sure none of them got elected. And that's if they even got on the ballot. Well, the GIs started calling out the corruption, so the cops started arresting GIs. And these guys weren't having any of that bullshit. First of all, these are some Appalachian country boys, and if you paid any attention to my Civil War historical videos, they were from an area which was staunchly Union during the war, so they were fiercely patriotic. And second of all, these guys literally just fought Nazis and their Axis allies. So the cops started fucking around, and the GIs decided it was time for someone to find out. They organized a quote-unquote fighting bunch to keep the politicians, the county sheriff's department, and their hired thugs, but I repeat myself, from beating up voters on election day. Now, these guys weren't just wildly recruiting anyone. The guy in charge of the fighting bunch, Bill White, and I want you to remember that name too, Bill White picked out only the most hardcore combat veterans, people who'd been balls deep in the shit. He made sure to pick, and I quote, only the ones that was frontline warriors that's done fighting and didn't care to bust a cap on you. Yes, that phrase has been around since at least 1946. These men used their mustering out pay to buy firearms to augment what they might have brought home from the war, and then they sat back and waited. Some of the fighting bunch volunteered as poll watchers, others just hung around as a show of force. They partnered up with other GIs who weren't part of the fighting bunch, who were there to observe at polling stations. Conveniently, the mayor of the town and every single city policeman were nowhere to be found. The local sheriff department, which was in bed with the political machine and the corrupt politicians, wasn't having anyone's nonsense. They had recruited a number of out-of-state mercenaries to come be deputized, augmenting the county sheriff's department, which had just 15 deputies, to over 200. These deputized thugs deployed to each of the polling stations to make sure that nothing went crazy. So when a GI volunteering as a poll watcher requested that a ballot box be opened and certified, which by law he was legally allowed to do, these deputies beat him, arrested him, and threw him in jail. At a separate polling place, another deputy prevented an elderly black farmer from casting his vote, so a GI stepped in. The cop punched the GI with brass knuckles and then shot the farmer in the back. And when I say cop, I mean sheriff's deputy. Now the fighting bunch swung into action. They had previously sent a telegraph to the Tennessee governor and to the U.S. Attorney General asking for help in ensuring a lawful, fair election. Since they'd gotten no response, and since the local sheriff had deputized a bunch of randos, which he then armed and sent to guard all the polling places, the veterans decided it's time to gear up. So the sheriff apparently caught wind that the GIs were arming themselves, so he started ordering polling places to be closed. He ordered the polling ballot boxes to be taken to the town jail. A couple more veterans watching the ballot boxes got beaten up. And then the sheriff tried to take 2 GI poll watchers hostage to ensure good behavior. Those guys escaped by diving through a glass window, so the sheriff ordered his deputies to start shooting into the crowd to try and stop the GIs from escaping. That's when he knew he fucked up. So the GIs knew that they had a 3-to-1 lead in the polls, and they knew that the ballot boxes going to the jail would end up being rigged. And they knew that the former sheriff, who is now running for county boss or county commissioner, was at the jail with the current sheriff and also a man named George Woods, who was the Tennessee Speaker of the State House of Representatives and also the Secretary of the McMinn County Election Commission. In other words, almost the entire election commission, which could certify and validate the count from within the jail unobserved, was at the jail. I don't need to spell it out for you how fucking corrupt that is. When the GIs heard that the sheriff had tried to kidnap fellow veterans, the GIs responded in force, reasoning that the law was being broken by the government and its own law enforcement subordinates. Now, accounts vary as to how what happened next would actually happen, but the end result is that the GIs from the fighting bunch arrived at the jail with the rest of the county's veterans, plus a whole lot of citizens who were tired of the corrupt bullshit. The GIs demanded to observe the vote counting and were told to get lost. Bill White, the leader of the fighting bunch, was armed with a pistol, a shotgun, and a rifle. Sources, including Bill White himself, say that he's the one who approached the jail, which was barricaded and manned by at least 55 deputies and deputized volunteers. Estimates of the number of veterans besieging the jail vary from several hundred to as high as 2,000. Bill White says he handpicked 60 men and he split his fighting bunch into 2 groups. One got on the roof at the bank that overlooked the town jail, and the others went over to the post office, putting the jail in overwatch with interlocked fields of fire. The rest of the veterans took up positions along the town square, effectively sealing it off and surrounding the jail. Now, at this point, the deputies knew they were in some deep shit. Bill White asked twice for the ballot boxes to be released, and on the second time he said they were going to besiege the jail and blow it up if the deputies didn't comply. According to White, he heard one of the deputized men fearfully report that that deputy had heard someone rack a bolt on a rifle, so they knew that shit was getting dangerous. At this point, according to White, he fired the first shot, taking out a deputy that had started to run back inside the jail. The rest of the veterans took that as a signal to open up, and the remaining deputies retreated inside, but quite a few of them were already laying outside severely wounded or worse. So now the veterans had kicked off a gun battle on home soil. These guys weren't stupid. They knew that they had to win this before the morning or they'd be going to jail for a long, long time. Word had gotten around that the National Guard was coming, and the veterans didn't want to face down fellow troops who probably wouldn't be on their side. Bill White made hourly demands for surrender, which went ignored. The GIs threw Molotov cocktails and kept up steady fire on the jail. At least one automatic weapon was put into use. The sheriff and the former sheriff, who was now running for county commissioner, managed to escape in the back of an ambulance that the GIs had respectfully let through the siege line, thinking it was to evacuate wounded. Also escaped was George Woods, who I mentioned was the Speaker of the House and also sat on the County Election Commission. Woods is reported to have contacted the county boss, the next county over, begging for reinforcements. That man, Paul Biggs, responded, "Do you think I'm crazy?" and he hung up on Woods. Eventually, Bill White knew that things had to change, so they started making bombs out of dynamite. They started blowing up police cruisers. Eventually, They blew up the porch of the jail, collapsing it against the front door, and they blew a hole in the jail wall. At the same time, they also blew up the sheriff's car. This happened at about 3:30 a.m. With the sheriff and his lackey having fled, abandoning the deputies and the deputized thugs to their own fate, the men inside the jail surrendered. Bill White and his men stormed the jail, and shortly thereafter they found that some of the tally sheets had been doctored or fabricated to report a 15-to-1 advantage for the corrupt politicians. The veterans found George Woods and brought him to the jail. Woods acknowledged that things definitely looked hinky and suggested that he call up former Navy officer and lawyer Ralph Duggan to balance things out during the vote tally, since Woods knew that the veterans knew that Woods had been on the wrong team. In the end, veteran party candidate Knox Henry was certified as county sheriff. None of the veterans were killed, and only a few light injuries were reported. Knox Henry was an Army Air Force veteran, and since he was on the ticket, he knew that he was a big target. Reports got out and got back to him that the local county machine wanted to kill him. So the veterans took Knox Henry over to a nearby county that was veteran friendly, and Henry spent the night under guard in the town jail with a handful of veterans making sure that things went smoothly. In the aftermath of the gun battle, the now former sheriff, his deputies, and the deputized out-of-state thugs were suddenly nowhere to be found and would not reappear for some time. Every candidate on the GI Nonpartisan League was elected and certified by Ralph Duggan and George Woods working together. The GIs kept watch around the courthouse and put George Woods under escort at all times, not trusting him to stick around. The GIs quickly cleaned up the town, put a stop to acts of revenge, including among their own. Fightin' Bunch leader Bill White was made sheriff's deputy because Bill White wasn't afraid to keep the GIs in line either. The mayor initially refused calls to resign, but when the county political machine collapsed, the mayor and 4 aldermen resigned. These resignations met with popular approval. For about an entire month, the GIs unofficially held the town until all the candidates could be legally sworn in. The Battle of Athens was followed by movements of veterans in other Tennessee counties promoting a statewide coalition against corrupt political machines in the upcoming November elections. The GIs had talked about making the GI Nonpartisan League into a nationwide political party, but Marine General Evans Carlson heard about it and said that they should just work through the existing political parties. Sound familiar? The new GI government of Athens eventually decided to disband, publicly stating that they had intended to replace one political machine, and they only replaced it with another, more powerful one, and they didn't want that. In other boss-ruled southern states, those bosses held a whole Southern convention to discuss their fears that veterans would resort to further violence. The nonpartisan GI Political League replied to inquiries by veterans elsewhere in the United States with the advice that shooting it out was not the most desirable solution to political problems. But it is a solution. I'm just saying. With ICE agents refusing to provide identification, refusing to produce warrants, wearing masks and nondescript civilian clothing, combined with a man wearing police uniforms and decked out an SUV to look like a police vehicle, and then going on a killing spree in which he encountered actual police officers twice, including when he was in the act of shooting up the home of slain Representative Hortman and her husband. It's hard to tell who's legit, and that's not even counting the numerous incidents of MAGA fuckface ass clowns cosplaying as ICE. Now, I posted a thing last night to the Sons of Liberty social media accounts that you should all be following, hint hint, wink wink, showing a handful of incidents of people cosplaying ICE and asking how we're supposed to know the difference. The answer is, we don't. And you should absolutely be concerned for your safety and the safety of the marginalized people around you. It's only a matter of time before people have had enough and start exercising their Second Amendment rights. Are you a white person? It's time for you to stand the fuck up and use that privilege to protect others. And regardless of your skin tone or ethnicity, I've been saying this for years. If you're not a gun owner, it's time for you to start learning how to responsibly carry and getting your range time in. If we the people don't get our shit sorted and start taking these fucking politicians out of office, and I mean both Republican and Democrat, if we don't start getting them out and replacing them with people like you and me, people who are fed the fuck up and will absolutely represent their constituents and not some orange painted clown who less than a third of the population even like, then the scales are going to need to tip. And a lot of y'all look to your veteran community because we just spent over 20 years of endless war fighting terrorism or whatever. So it's a metric fuck ton of combat veterans out there. I think we can all understand why people are afraid of armed veterans who are pissed off. So let me be clear here. I believe in peaceful, nonviolent protests, but I also recognize that in the 20th century alone, including less than 80 years ago, Americans finally got fucking fed up with the goddamn bullshit coming from its government and the law enforcement agencies that refused to be accountable to the people. And it wasn't just angry white veterans either. If you thought the civil rights struggle was attained by a bunch of peaceful black people, you were badly mistaken. We've sanitized the civil rights struggle to make it palatable to soft-handed, touchy-feely, tree-hugging white liberals. There's a reason that the right wing, yes, I said the right wing, tends to think of liberals as a bunch of weak, meek cowards. I disagree. Cowardice is showing up in face masks, body armor, and full military battle rattle to arrest unarmed lettuce pickers and dishwashers. Point blank America, we have American Gestapo running roughshod over the constitutional rights of not just illegal immigrants, but legal immigrants, naturalized citizens, and American-born citizens. They've already taken the gloves off, and if we don't stand the fuck up, then one day, soon, it might be you. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if some bitches are watching my videos right now going, "Man, I'd really like to punch him in the mouth." Come at me, bro. I'm a combat veteran with an invincibility complex and a kick in your ass fetish. And the whole entire ass reason that I started the Sons of Liberty was to reclaim the symbology and reclaim patriotism from the cultists who have hijacked this nation. That includes this notion that only conservatives are prepared to fight government overreach. We are very quickly reaching a tipping point. Stand your ground kind of slaps when it swings back around and smacks wingnuts in their fucking face. And since we're reclaiming shit, let's start reclaiming the phrase, "I'd rather be judged by 12 of my peers than carried by in a coffin by 6. That is my time for today. For the Sons of Liberty, I'm Admin Tim. Don't forget to watch the special Sons of Liberty live stream tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Big Sarge out here. 2 claps and a Rick. Join the fam. Woo!
And now it's time for the Throatpunch!